Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Good Pods, Google Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. And please tell all your family and friends about the show. Our guest today is Tim Wright. He is here to celebrate a great middle grade novel called The Adventures of Toby Baxter. Before we invite Tim into the studio, we want to invite you to a very special live event that is happening in just a few days from now. August 6th, 2022, the New Bedford Buttonwood Park Zoo. They're going to be hosting a little celebration for the release of episode number 1500 of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. I am so excited. We've met so many authors, celebrated so many books here on the podcast, and now we're going to be celebrating that achievement on August 6th, 2022, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the beautiful Buttonwood Park Zoo in the wonderful city of New Bedford here in Massachusetts. If you are anywhere in the New England area, come on down. You're going to be experiencing some great, totally interactive family magic. We'll be giving away loads and loads and loads of books. We'll be interviewing authors. We'll be having live read-alouds. There'll be animals. There'll be lots of fun. We'll also be interviewing some of the folks, some of the families at the zoo. Maybe you'll be heard on a future episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. It's all happening August 6th, 2022 at the Buttonwood Park Zoo in beautiful New Bedford, Massachusetts. Hope to see you there. Join us right now from Phoenix in the great state of Arizona. Our guest is here today to celebrate his middle grade novel. Is called The Adventures of Toby Baxter. Please welcome to the show, Tim Wright. Hey, Tim, how are you?
Well, I'm doing great, Jed. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you on. Tell us about Toby Baxter.
Yeah, it's a story about a boy who's just turning 13. He is a huge Marvel superhero fan. But does not see himself as a hero whatsoever. So like a lot of boys, he sort of lives vicariously through his superheroes. And he suddenly finds himself on the night of his 13th birthday, invited, so to speak, into his closet by an elf. And he's taken through his closet into this land called Riverhome, where the elves are at battle with the trolls. And Toby discovers, to his shock, that he is the hero who is going to rescue the river elves. And he has no idea how he's going to do it because he doesn't believe he has any skills or superpowers to do so. And so it really becomes a quest for him to discover what his skills are and how he's going to use them, whether he'll use them to help people or whether he'll use them for his own selfish purposes.
You know, I have to tell you, I'm glad that Toby is braver than I, because if her elf ever came out of the closet and invited me in, I would have passed. Even now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there is a little warm up to kind of get him ready for it. So once the elf does show up, he's intrigued enough to say, okay, I'm going. Of course, he thinks he's dreaming to begin with, and then finds out it's not a dream.
This sounds really like a lot of fun. It sounds like a really fun read, but it also sounds like it's, Toby is kind of going through some sort of rite of passage. It's, he's becoming a man.
Yeah, so the book actually grew out of my work with Dr. Michael Gurian. Michael is known kind of as the father of the modern-day boy movement. And he has, for the last 30-some years, been using brain science and best practices to help parents and educators better understand the nuances between the way boys learn and the way girls learn. And those nuances can be very, very important. There are a lot of things we share in common, but there are some differences. And one of the things that he and I connected on was rites of passage, which are these strategic moments in the lives of our boys and girls, usually around the age of 12 or 13, where adults surround these kids. We sort of lost this practice, but adults surround these kids and take them through a process that basically asks them the question, what kind of man do you want to be? What kind of woman do you want to be? And how do we begin to build the character qualities in you to become that person? And he and I wrote some rites of passage programs, both for faith-based communities and secular communities. And I thought it would be really fun just to take all of that information and put it into an engaging story where all of those things sort of come in sideways. That's what stories do, right? They come at us sideways. And so as Toby is confronted with the question, how will you use your power? And then we see how he does. It gives boys and girls and their parents and grandparents a chance to sort of think that question or through that question themselves. How do we help our child begin to develop those qualities that will help them have a positive impact on the world? And so you're right. It's a fun book. I think I've put a lot of humor in there. I wrote it with adults in mind so that they would want to read it with their kids. So there's some humor there. The kids will enjoy, but the parents will be in on the joke. Mm-hmm. And it was really meant for families to read together in the hope that once in a while they'll just stop and say, all right, now if you were Toby, what would you do?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's what this podcast is all about, and reminding parents that it's your job of reading with your kids doesn't end when they become independent readers.
Right.
It's something, first off, it's something that you should do because it's fun, and it's a great way to bond with your kids. But also, reading with your kids and talking about what we're reading or about what we're watching on TV or in the movie theater or what we're listening to on the radio. It's a great way to share our values with our kids and to just talk about those values and not pound them into our kids, but just to have respectful, mature conversations with our kids, letting them know what is important to us, what we hope is important to them, and helping them understand that they're going to be adults at some point and they're going to have to make these choices, and we hope they make the right ones.
Yeah, and I think your point is well said. Values don't just come magically to our kids, right? They're going to learn them somewhere. And we have these wonderful resources available to us in books in particular that can help us chat with our kids about the things that are important to us. Our kids may or may not adopt those values, right? But what we want to do as parents is to plant the seeds, to give them the best possible path forward. And I found, and the reason why I chose the quest fantasy novel genre is because I think that that's one of the great tools that we have available to us as parents, is these engaging stories where these boys and girls go off on these quests to discover who they are, to face their fears. They do it with mentors. And hopefully in the end, they come out the other side and realize I'm not perfect, but these are some things I want to embrace to be the person that I want to be, that I was created to be, whatever language parents want to use. Mm-hmm. And, we saw this phenomena years ago with the Harry Potter stories, right? Parents and grandparents and children sitting down and reading these books together, watching these movies together. Mm-hmm. And that's what great quest stories do. They help us see characters who are the age of our kids, 12, 13, maybe 10 or 11, and suddenly they're on an adventure that our kids are going on, but set in a different world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so very important to help our kids go through these, help our kids have a safe way to imagine themselves dealing with some of the monsters that they're going to face in their lives. Why do you think? Because I think, we were talking earlier about rites of passage, and you hear even now that in different parts of the world there are still tribes that go through these rites of passage that some of us might think are crazy, but it's a test for a young person to go and prove, like, I've done this, and we've gotten away from that. I know that there are some, in the Catholic tradition. There's confirmation and
Yes.
Jewis's bar mitzvahs, but it's not the same. It's like, go to these classes and now you're a man. Well, I don't really feel any different. Why do you think we got away from that whole initiation process?
Well, I think in some ways it could be traced just to the world changing so much, especially in our westernized cultures where, we sort of moved away from being on the farm and families were together and they were training their kids to take over the family business. We've moved into suburbia. We've kind of outsourced so much of child rearing to other people. Some of it great, right? We've got our educators who are professionally trained. We want them to teach. There are some parents who choose homeschooling, but we've sort of outsourced a lot of these things. And then we shouldn't be surprised if our kids come home sort of challenging the values that we have. And I think there's a positive and negative to that. There are certainly some things that I have grown in terms of my understanding of the world because my kids have challenged some things that I believe. But I also think it's important for my kids to have a foundation and a place to think from. What is their worldview so that they can take in all this information they have and they can, walk with their friends. And when their friends want to make decisions that aren't healthy, to have the resilience to say no. And so, whether we take our kids through rites of passage, strategic opportunities that happen in different places still. You mentioned in religious venues. We do the same in the Lutheran Church. Mm-hmm. There are ways to be constantly talking about with our children about these important values. And among them, for example, with Toby, what I've tried to do is raise some of those issues for families. We use the word hero, and each letter in hero means something for Toby as he goes through the process. But he's constantly asking the question, how am I going to use my power? And then he'll be challenged. All right. He's at a moment where he's angry. His friends have been hurt. He just wants to hurt back. Is that what he should do? Mm-hmm. Does violence beget violence? Does anger beget anger? And so those are all of those topics that we do have opportunities to talk about with our kids. When we read books, when we watch movies, I think the Marvel movies in many ways provide opportunities for our kids to talk about what does it mean to be a hero? Mm-hmm. Because the Marvel heroes tend to be so flawed, which is just like us. Mm-hmm. They make sometimes good decisions, sometimes bad decisions. And so there are a lot of good resources out there if people don't have access to rites of passage.
Yeah. And it saddens me that there's so many families out there that don't take advantage. They drop the kids off at the theater.
Yeah.
And going, how was the movie? Yeah, that's great. Cool.
Yeah.
And when the same thing happens at a lot of churches, drop the kids off at church and go.
Yeah.
And it's like, dudes, there's just so much. You love your kids. You loved your kids when they were 3 and 4, and you wanted to spend so much time with them. They're just as adorable in a different way. And when they're 14 or 15 and they're challenging you, that's cool. It's frustrating.
Yeah, it is.
But it can be very cool, and it can really bring you together.
Yeah, I think you're hitting all the right buttons there. And we both know this. Parenting has changed dramatically just in our lifetimes. Mm-hmm. And people are so busy. We sort of got caught up in offering our children and getting them involved in as many opportunities as possible because we wanted them to be well-rounded. I think what COVID taught us as we step back a little bit is maybe that's not healthy for any of us. And, so part of being a parent is to say, all right, my child is really good at these 2 things. Let's really focus on that. Not 6 things, not 10 things, because these are things that will help my child. These are his superpowers. These are her skills. This is what's going to help my child throughout the rest of his life or her life. To slow life down a little bit, to take 2 or 3 layers off and replace a layer or 2 with these moments you're talking about, these magic moments of reading a book together, of watching a show together and just talking about it for a few minutes. And even when your kids roll their eyes and say, oh, just let me finish the movie, turn that pause button off. and just smile and say, indulge me. And those kids, years later, they're going to do the same thing with their kids because it was a magic moment for them.
Yeah. I've shared this on the podcast in the past. I just, when my daughter was in middle school, I was taking a media literacy class taught by a wonderful sister, Sister Rose. And in the class, she said, it quite surprised me, don't try to ban anything. Instead, experience the media with your kids and talk about it. Yeah. And right after that particular class, my daughter and I were sitting down, and there was a commercial came on for a new show that was coming out. It was Jersey Shore.
Yes.
And my daughter said, I can't wait to watch that. And my first reaction was, hell no. But then I remembered Sister Rose, and I thought, we'll watch it together.
Yeah.
And we did. And we laughed at some things I shouldn't have been laughing at in front of my daughter. But after the show, we sat down, and I said, so what did you think? Well, it was funny when they did this and this and this. And I goes, but what about that girl, Snooki? What do you think about her?
Yeah.
Oh, she has absolutely no respect for herself. If she did, she wouldn't let them do this and this and this and this. And I'm like, Sister Rose had a good idea. And so we watched the series with just from that perspective. And after every show, we were able to sit down and really have some great conversations about values, about what we were seeing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think our kids are a whole lot sharper than we give them credit for sometimes. And obviously, there's a bunch of stuff going into their brains that you and I, for example, did not have to contend with social media and so on. You know, I remember I'm of the age when we had 3 networks and that was it. And then maybe the local channel. And, you know, our parents were worried about that. And now with cable and Netflix and all these things and TikTok and Twitter and, you know, our kids are being bombarded with information. What we want to do is give them filters to help them take in what's healthy and to say no to what doesn't help make them better people.
Yeah. You were mentioning earlier the work and the research you did about brain science and differences between, we didn't get into specific differences between boys' brains and girls' brains. Would you read Toby Baxter differently with your daughter than you would with your son?
You know, that's a really good question. I obviously each child is going to be different, even if they're boys or girls. Generally, what the research tells us, this is generally now, right? There's always exceptions, but generally, girls are far more likely to pick up a book and read it. Boys, it's a little tougher. What boys like to read tend to be books with pictures or graphics like comic books. And actually, that's what I did with my character, Toby. He starts out the class assignment is to read The Hobbit. And he's not interested. He just wants to get home and read his comic books. And his teacher is best friends with his mom, so that makes things even more dicey for him. And it's while sort of reading The Hobbit a little bit that this elf shows up in his life. He thinks it's a hobbit at first. And so I tried to write the book from that boy's perspective who hates reading books, would rather read comic books. And so there's some comic book type imagery even in the story. But I think for both, it would be to either sit down and read a chapter with them, and the chapters are short, whether it's boy or girl, or if your daughter, for example, really likes reading on her own, just let her read on her own and say, okay, I'm going to read the book too. And then in a week, let's just talk about it. I want to know what you thought. Now, it could be that your boy just picks it up and he's done with it in 2 hours. Who knows, right? But I do think that with boys, it's a little more challenging to get them to read books. They tend to be a year and a half behind in reading, right from the get-go anyway. And they don't, the answer to the question, you know, how did you feel about this doesn't come as easily for them. Because men process things on one side of the brain. So we process a lot of visual stuff. Girls process with both sides of the brain at the same time. So when something happens, they can immediately put words to emotions. Boys can't. So if you ask a boy, how do you feel about this? It could take him anywhere from 15 minutes to 2 days to connect words to the feeling. Where if you ask a girl how you feel about this, immediately she can do it because of the way her brain is wired. So one of the things that you want to ask a boy, maybe rather than how did you feel about this, is, well, what do you think about this? What would you do if you were Toby Baxter? Where with your daughter, you might be able to say, well, how did you feel about Toby's answer to that question or his actions? And both will elicit then better discussion. The other thing I would say with boys is if you want to have good discussion with them, they need to be moving. So maybe you read a chapter and then say, okay, let's go out for a walk or let's shoot baskets and let's just talk about the chapter for about 3 minutes, 5 minutes max. Give them a time limit because it's the activity for boys that stimulates the brain and the words to come out. Where girls, it's not as important. They can, right there, they could sit for 2 hours and then you could have a 2-hour conversation with them. It works a bit differently just because of the way that they're wired.
And this is knowledge that was gained because we were able to look at the brain. Is that right? We were able to take fMRIs and
brain scans show hundreds of differences between a male brain and a female brain. And again, these are generalizations. Right. There are brains that are in the middle, right? And these scans, rather than stereotyping us, really help us better understand each other.
Sure.
And especially for educators who are right now, boys have fallen behind girls in every area of education from preschool through graduate school, and not just a little bit, by a long, long way. And part of that is because our education system over the years tends to do a better job of teaching to the way that girls learn. A lot of sit, a lot of listen, a lot of emotive conversation. And where this is helpful for teachers with a lot of boys in their class is to create brain breaks, get the boys standing up, moving around as they teach. And anything that you do for boys to help them learn better benefits girls.
Fascinating. Really is fascinating. And it's a bit, I'm imagining that some people, this conversation about the differences between boys and girls, kind of tough to have these conversations nowadays.
There are certain pockets where it's a bit difficult to talk about it because, rightfully so, we want to make sure that everybody's treated equally, in particular our daughters. But we have put a lot of emphasis on our daughters, and I raised a daughter. I've got 2 granddaughters, so I care deeply about them. We've put a lot of energy over the last 60 years into our daughters, and we still got a ways to go. The problem is we sort of lost sight of our boys. And it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, right? When our boys succeed, our girls succeed. When our girls succeed, our boys can succeed. And what we found, Michael and I, is that when you simply get into the grassroots and you're talking with educators and you're talking with parents, they know there's a problem with their boys. Now, there are issues with their daughters, but they know right now when it comes to education, our boys are really, really hurting. Just as one stat, 70% of all D's and F's are given to boys. And only 40% of all A's are given to boys. Now, that's not a boy problem. That's a systems problem. And once you just add in a few little movement things into a boy's education, it turns his world upside down in terms of his openness to learning. So a lot of it just has to do with movement, more visuals, a little less emotive, and maybe a little bit more thinking. And that will benefit girls as well.
Wow. So much. I think we've forgotten the fact that our kids are individuals.
Right.
We need to look at them, and we can't expect our kids to automatically just fit into whatever system we create at a school. We need to create a system that benefits our kids and serves them the way they need to be served.
Sure. And certainly education should be a parent-teacher partnership. And, our teachers, God bless them, some of them have 30 kids in their classroom, right? And they just sort of have to teach to that classroom, assuming everybody's kind of at the same level. Of course, they're not. And that's where it's important for parents to step in And if their child is struggling with reading, well, then do some more reading at home, or find some tutors. Our teachers, our educators can't do everything. They're doing a fantastic job, but they can't do everything. And in our family, I've got 2 grandchildren who have some challenges. They're very, very smart, but they have challenges in school with reading, with speech. So, when you do the tests on how are they comprehending, great, but they just have a hard time articulating. They have a hard time reading. And so we can't expect that a teacher with a classroom of 30 people can give full-time attention to that one issue. Mm-hmm. So my daughter and her husband have been very, very good about getting outside help so that they're augmenting what the kids are learning in school.
Yeah. So important. Hey, you know what else is important? We need to know where we can go to find out more about the Adventures of Toby Baxter and find out more about you, Tim.
Sure. I have a website, timwrightbooks.com, timwrightbooks.com. And if people go there, there's 2 links where they can buy the book. They can go to Amazon and buy it, or they can go to BookBaby, which published it. Mm-hmm. But if they sign up on my email list, they'll automatically get a free prequel to the Toby Baxter adventure that sort of sets everything up. And I don't send out a lot of emails, maybe 2 a month max, just to keep people up to speed. I'm working on the sequel right now. But if they want to get the free prequel, go to timwrightbooks.com. That's timwrightbooks.com. And there's some other resources there, including a link to the podcast I do with Dr. Michael Green called The Wonder of Parenting podcast.
Awesome. We've had a really great time speaking with the author of The Adventures of Toby Baxter. Great middle grade novel from our guest, Tim Wright. Hey, Tim, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Leticia Amaya. She is a literacy expert, and she has some great tips that will really help your kid get off to an amazing start of the school year. That's the next episode of the podcast. Hey, please be sure to connect with us on social media, facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram, at Reading With Your Kids on TikTok, at Deadly Magic on Twitter. Also, please feel free to go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, sign up for our free newsletter, and also use that contact button at the top of the page to let us know what we're doing well, let us know what we could be doing better, and let us know who you would like to hear on a future episode of the Reading With Your Kids podcast. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Tim Wright. Please be sure to check out The Adventures of Toby Baxter. I also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Nicole Belcastro, Mirabella Q, Rain Penn. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.